Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. That's really kind of you. We've got a lot of work to do today. I'm going to speak for about 20 minutes and then introduce Hajun, and then we'll be going to our workshops. Okay. There'll be a lot of people who tried to book for this, but literally within 48 hours of advertising it was overbooked. So we've said to people, don't worry, we'll try and do another one of these. Carol, the organizer, is now turning extremely pale. We're going to try and do another one of these, maybe a northern version as well, but thanks a lot for coming. I just want to, thanks for coming today. Thank you very much. This is the first event of its kind, we think, organized by a Shadow Chancellor. So the whole purpose of this is I want to lay out our economic strategy. As Jeremy made clear this week at the Ralph Miliband lecture, we make it absolutely clear Labour is not only a party of protest. Protest matters and protests make a difference. But I hope we've shown over the last 8 months how effective an opposition can make a difference. There's a number of my parliamentary colleagues here, Angela and Becky and Richard and Julie and others, and can I give a special mention as well to Dennis here and our members of the House of Lords who've been effectively destroying this government over the last few months. We've helped win U-turns on tax credits, cuts to disability payments. We've won U-turns on forced academisation. The government has U-turned on cuts to solar panel subsidies and on the tampon tax. They've U-turned on Sunday trading and on taking child refugees, and now even on the inclusion of the NHS within TTIP. I tell you, you can get dizzy watching them spinning on the opposite benches. That's what an effective opposition can help do. Yes, it comes alongside all that you've been doing in terms of protests and movements outside of Parliament, but you know as well as I do, it's not enough to block and protest. If we want to make a lasting difference to people's lives, we have to offer an alternative. So Labour is not only a party of protest, it's a party of government. The Tories may be in disarray, but even as they fight like rats in a sack over Europe, they'll agree on one thing, let's be clear. What they agree upon is that they will tear up our hard-won rights, smash up all the civilising institutions that previous generations have won, whether it's the BBC or the NHS, from our schools to the welfare state, literally nothing remains safe while they're in power. This means we all have a responsibility to show the British people how Labour is not just an effective opposition, but a credible alternative in government. That's what this is all about. We will defend the good that's already been won, but we can go further than this. We should aim to show how we can improve on what we have. Labour's great reforming governments have always had a vision, whether it's when we created the NHS, or yes, when we introduced the first national minimum wage. And when we return to government, we've got to aspire to be another great reforming administration. Let me tell you this, I want to surpass even the Attlee government for radical reform. The situation demands nothing less. Simply undoing the damage inflicted by Cameron and Osborne will be a huge task, but we should aim higher than this, and we are. It's not just clearing up the mess and addressing the challenges, whether that's in inequality or climate change, but making the most of the opportunities that could be opened up. New technology and new ways of working could help create a better and more prosperous society. Our whole society could do so much better than we are at the moment. What we've attempted over the last 8 months is to lay out the framework by which Labour can win the next election and then set about the fundamental business of transforming capitalism. We should aim at nothing less than that. So it's important that we state our objective clearly. Let me tell you, our aim is that in the life of one Parliament, we lay the foundations of a new society that's radically fairer, radically more equal, and radically more democratic. And it's based upon a prosperous economy which is economically and environmentally sustainable, but above all else, where that prosperity is shared by all. And we aim to introduce a new era of transformative economics to achieve that goal. That means, yes, we've got to be ambitious. We have to rewrite the rules of the economy. It's the words of our Economic Advisory Council member, Joseph Stiglitz. The old rules have failed too many. They've meant rising inequality and wasted talent. Prosperity has been concentrated in the hands of too few, and the best opportunities in life restricted to a sort of gilded set at the top of society. Also, we're trampling all over the natural world and squandered its resources. This is a bigger project than offering just a few appealing policy tweaks here and there. It means striving for a transformation in how capitalism in Britain operates. It means a fundamental shift in how governments relate to the economy as well. We're a long way from the election, but in outline, the rewriting of these rules has at first three parts, and let me just take you through those. First, we need an absolute commitment to responsible financing by a future Labour government. Let me spell out what that means. The old rules meant that the last Labour government, to be frank, relied too heavily on tax revenues from financial services and too heavily on off-balance sheet spending through the Private Finance Initiative. It didn't do enough to clamp down on tax evasion and avoidance. It helped create an unfair tax system. So in opposition today, we're doing all we can here, and yes, at the EU level as well, to hold this government of tax dodgers to account. This country, under Labour, let me make this absolutely clear, this country will no longer act like a tax haven for the super rich, and nor will those other places that this country exercises jurisdiction over. And on the other side, it means that every penny of government spending will be accounted for. Under the current government, we won't gamble with the nation's finances. Unlike the current government, we won't gamble with the nation's finances, setting unachievable targets and leaving black holes in their accounts. If we don't show that we are responsible custodians of the people's money, they won't give us the right to govern. So we can reject the dreadful choice of austerity and maintain solid government finances. We've enshrined these commitments, as some of you know, in our fiscal credibility rule, drawn up with the help of the world-leading economists on our Economic Advisory Council. The rule says we will close the deficit on a day-to-day spending over a 5-year period, but we'll make sure that government has the capacity to invest in the future. And to be frank, if there was a single biggest failure for George Osborne, and there have been many, it's been his failure to invest. But to be frank also, he's the worst of a long tradition of weak investment by successive British governments. We want to break with that. Investment is the key to shared prosperity now and the future. So let me be clear, we're not just a party that thinks about how we spend money, we're a party that thinks how we earn money. And the clue's in our name, isn't it? We're the party of Labour, the party of wealth creators, of technicians, designers, machinists, entrepreneurs, the self-employed, the party of workers and small businesses. So second, let me say that we need to reshape how government and the economy relate to each other. Another Economic Advisory Council member of ours, Mariana Mazzucato, has written about how what she calls the entrepreneurial state can help support new industries and technologies, thus breaking with the failures of the hands-off approach. We've seen, tragically, just in the last few months, what happens when a government thinks a vital industry like steel can be left to the mercies of the market. Angela has pointed out time and time again what this means in Parliament. It means plant closures and job losses, devastating whole communities. It means a key industry for the future left on the brink of disappearance. We responded as an opposition rapidly to the steel crisis, arguing that the government had to step in. Yes, if necessary, if a buyer doesn't come forward rapidly, to nationalise, to stabilise the industry. But we also said the government should be using government spending to buy steel from British plants, protecting jobs here. And as Angela pointed out time and time again, and work with, not against our European partners to stop the dumping of cheap steel. I'm pleased at long last, as a result of pressure across the dispatch box from our front bench, but Angela in particular, our do-nothing business secretary has been forced to respond to the pressure to act. He couldn't find his way to Mumbai, but maybe eventually, as a result of Angela's pressure, he found his way to Port Talbot. But we need to think beyond crisis management now. If, for instance, we're serious about seeing a shift towards a low-carbon economy, we'll need to transform how we produce and use electricity. More public transport and more renewables have to be part of the mix, and that has to mean supporting a steel industry here. So we're not just seeing industrial policy as a result to a crisis. So too many governments in the past, and not just this one, thought government should only intervene when something goes wrong. We think government intervention should be there to make sure things go right. The swift actions taken by the previous Labour government, for instance, to support the car industry in the aftermath of the 2008 crash, mean that today Britain exports more cars than ever before. So we know intervention can work, and we have to apply it properly. Some of you know that Jeremy has argued for a national investment bank. We believe this could supply the investment needed for big infrastructure projects like high-speed rail that form the backbone of our modern economy and in which Britain is sorely deficient. It can help local and regional institutions provide the financing for our small businesses as well. Still, they're starved of funding by our existing banks. And we'll always look for ways to ensure new technologies get the funding they need, not just for research, but for dissemination and adoption and implementation. Renewables in particular need attention, and as we develop our policies, we'll be drawing upon the best research and expertise to show how this new institution, the National Investment Bank, could work. We'll overcome the arrogance and isolation of government as well. Civil servants, to be frank, don't always know best, nor do politicians. Too many governments in the past have believed that they do. But it should be fundamental to a democratic approach to economic policy that governments are there to bring people together and to facilitate discussion and to listen, not to impose policies, but to seek consensus. So when we return to government, I'll be looking to set up an economic and innovation forum that will provide a space where representatives of businesses and unions and wider civil society can come together with government at a national level. We're going to create a real partnership in policy making when we return to power, and we'll restore that line of communication from the shop floor, the office, the studio, and the R&D department to the heart of government decision making once again. We think we're far more effective when we work together, when we cooperate. But intervention can take place, we believe, not just at the national level. Pioneering councils, under the real cosh of Tory austerity, are having to think creatively about how to deliver local services and to secure the local economy. I want to pay tribute. Transformative councils like Preston in Lancashire are developing their local entrepreneurial state. The council is working with other major local institutions like the university, the health service, the police and others to help support the local economy. They're using procurement spending to reroute it back into local businesses. They've provided a multi-million-pound boost to the economy in Preston and beyond. Alongside that, this is a Labour council now, in some of the direst financial circumstances that local government has seen in decades. They're working and helping workers to set up cooperatives to sustain local employment. We think this bottom-up approach can be applied more widely. Just take the scandal of the housing crisis. At the national level, Jeremy has made the shadow housing minister a fully fledged shadow cabinet post for the first time in many years. This reflects the high priority we're giving to housing and solving the serious housing crisis. Sadiq Khan has rightly highlighted the issue of housing costs in London. The cost of housing in London is arguably the biggest single blight on this city. Many, particularly young people who are unable to get onto the housing ladder, are then at the mercy of unforgiving, unrestrained housing market and landlords. Other urban areas are suffering from skyrocketing rents. So we'll look to give local authorities the powers to impose rent regulation to secure fair rents when these are needed, as Labour committed to at the last election. We know the supply of housing is simply not sufficient to meet demand. My colleague, the Shadow Housing Minister, John Healey, has set out his plans to build 100,000 new council houses a year, funded from savings in the Housing Benefit Bill. He's worked tirelessly to go through the detail. It's an unchallengeable piece of work. With fewer new social rented homes built last year than any time over the last 2 decades, it will be a top priority for a Labour government to reverse the short-term and counterproductive cuts in housing investment made by George Osborne. But we also have to meet the aspirations of people who want to own their own home. And we're also looking at how we can reverse the free-fall decline in home ownership, particularly amongst young people. There are now 1/3 fewer homeowners under 35 than when David Cameron became Prime Minister, and the biggest drop is amongst working-class young people. So we know that part of the reason why the Tories are failing on home ownership is that their support is not targeted at those who really need the help most. Thousands of households earning over £100,000 a year have benefited from the government's Help to Buy scheme, while their so-called starter homes will cost up to £450,000 each. So let me make it clear. Labour would make it a mission to ensure that families and young people on ordinary incomes aren't locked out of home ownership as they are under the Tories. And it's actually Labour councils again who are providing innovative solutions to the housing crisis, and I congratulate them. Councils like Manchester, Warrington and Sandwell, they're offering cheap local authority-backed mortgages to first-time owners in particular. With too many first-time buyers excluded from the housing market by high street banks, we'll be looking at ways to securely expand local authority mortgage lending. We need to solve the housing crisis, and we need action. So with mayors elected across major cities in this country, and I tell you, watching those mayor elections come in, of Sadiq, of Marvin down in Bristol, of Joe up in Liverpool and in Salford, don't tell me we didn't win those elections. We had a major success. So there's a new enthusiasm as a result and capacity to take the initiative locally. Bristol's new mayor, Marvin Rees, and his administration, they've just announced plans to build 2,000 new homes every year. They've immediately released the land the size of 80 football pitches for new building. So along with John Trickett, the Shadow Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government, I'll be convening a Mayor's Economic Forum to bring together local leaderships to participate in the development of economic policy making. For the first time, national economic policy making will be influenced directly by local decision makers representing their metropolises and their local communities. And clearly one of the first items on the agenda will be the housing crisis. We can all learn from each other in this, but we need mechanisms to make it happen. We're establishing this mechanism. This leads to the third policy area. We need to unlock the potential of the whole economy and society. The economic institutions that we have were developed in an earlier age. Too many of them are not fit for purpose in the 21st century. Our banking system failed in 2008 and still fails too many small businesses today. As Lord Turner has detailed, it pumps lending into the property market but fails to invest in the productive economy. No other major developed economy has a banking system so dominated by a few corporations. So we need to end that domination. So developing a new range of institutions, including the National Investment Bank, and also unlocking the powers that local authorities have to lend and also to secure additional funding. We need to make sure every part of our economy has access to the financing it needs, not concentrated in one sector or in one place. I can also say the fixation with shareholder value and short-termism results in our giant corporations sitting on giant cash piles, perhaps up to £700 billion at the moment. Instead of investing that money productively or creating new jobs and opportunities, these corporations are hoarding cash. And those responsible for running them are paying themselves obscene amounts of cash. Shareholders have risen up in revolt in recent weeks against excessive executive pay. I think we need to open up the whole question of how our major corporations are structured. We need to put an end to the short-termism, end the fixation with shareholder value, start to think how employees and customers can be brought into the decision-making process as well. These aren't just good in themselves. There's a hard-nosed economic case for addressing all of these questions. We know that there's a clear boost to the economy from worker ownership and management as well. One recent academic study thinks worker-managed companies enjoy a productivity bonus of between 6 and 14%. So I've said I want at least, when we go back into power, to double the size of the cooperative sector in this country. Similar economies like the US and Germany make far more use of cooperatives than here. And there's a long labour movement tradition in Britain of support for grassroots ownership and decentralised economies from the Rochdale pioneers onwards. That tradition has been buried for too long, and after the Second World War, Labour adopted a model of centralised ownership and control for the economy. This model worked well enough, but for a time, but it always had problems. So today, the proliferation of small-scale and digital technology can grant a new lease of life to the tradition. From community-owned renewable energy generation to open-source software, collective and shared forms of ownership can provide fairer and more efficient ways of working than the older business models. So the future has an ancient heart. I've said before that democracy and decentralisation must be the centrepiece of our economic policy. From the ground up, we can start to transform how capitalism in Britain works. Previous Labour governments were content to only think about how to redistribute income. Today, technological change means we have to think more closely about ownership as well. I've spoken before about moving beyond the Tory right to buy and creating our own Labour right to own. And I think this can be at the centre of our offer to Britain. A radical decentralisation of economic power and authority back to working people and local communities. Let me say this as well. If we're to make all this work, we have to go beyond simply thinking we can pull the existing levers of government and expect that to deliver results. The machinery of government that we have for overseeing the economy is looking increasingly rusty. Those levers cannot be relied upon. We have an HMRC that time and time again lets corporations off the hook when it comes to their taxes, whilst they're hounding hard-pressed small businesses and individuals. I want to pay tribute to the staff of HMRC who have been cut and cut again by Osborne. Staff at HMRC generate revenues. Cutting their numbers is self-defeating. But serious questions have to be asked about its management overall. Economists from across the political spectrum are questioning whether after 2008 we need a new way of making monetary policy as well. Andy Haldane, the chief economist at the Bank of England, has raised the interesting possibilities for monetary policy, including more quantitative easing and even negative interest rates. The current architecture was established in 1997. We can raise a legitimate question as whether the Monetary Policies Committee remit still fits the changed circumstances we're facing. And then at the heart of economic policy making in Britain sits the Treasury. Its powers, already expansive under Gordon Brown, have grown hugely under George Osborne. It dominates not just economic policy, but the whole of domestic policy making in Whitehall. Its staff, yeah, they're talented and dedicated, but time and time again, it's faced serious questions about its role. Is it too short-term in its outlook, too focused on London, too unimaginative in its approach? Ian Duncan Smith, and I won't often quote him, has even gone so far as to call it the worst thing in Britain. I've commissioned, as you know, a series of reviews led by experts to report on the functioning of all these critical institutions. Lord Kerslake, the former head of the Civil Service, is reviewing the Treasury. Professor Prem Sikka is reviewing the HMRC, and Professor Danny Blanchford is conducting a review of the Monetary Policy Committee. All three will report back over the next period and make recommendations that will feed into our own policy making, which you'll be part of as well. We're creating effectively our own architecture for sound economic policy making and implementation. You can see this is an incredibly bold programme, but economics isn't a spectator sport. I'm heartened to see so many people here today, but just as literally hundreds upon hundreds have been turning up across the country for our lecture series and our seminar series. Everyone here has a critical role to play. Fundamentally, what we've got to do is reshape the narrative on the economy. It's been dominated for too long by ludicrous claims made by the austerity mongers. Going back further, it's been dominated by a particular belief that free markets are fundamentally always right and that free markets' outcomes are always the best. We have to break that. But that means winning the argument. It means all of us being prepared to take on and challenge the arguments as they arise. It means we're already making the case for a different way of doing economics, based upon the best possible expert advice and with a clear vision for the future. So the debates and the discussions we're going to have today aren't supposed to stay on this campus. They need to be taken to every town and every community in the country. If we want to realize the kind of program I've laid out, we need to take that message to every corner of this country. I'm absolutely convinced that there's a real thirst to see something new. You don't need to spend too long convincing people that things aren't working now as they should. But unless we have a credible alternative and people prepared like you to make the case for it, we won't be able to change how things work. It doesn't mean shouting and berating those who disagree with us, but patiently explaining how we can do things better. So I think this conference should be the first of many. Slowly but surely, we need to reshape the discussion. Each one of us has an important role to play. We need you all to help raise the quality of economic discourse in this country. We need you all to be advocates of the transformative economics we're developing to achieve, yes, that fairer, more equal, more democratic, sustainable, prosperous society that we aspire to. So as we approach the election, we'll all work together to sharpen and develop the ideas collectively. I'll just say this finally. If the Tories are the party of a failing past and present, Labour's got to be the party of the future. If the Tories are the party of fear, Labour must be the party of hope. That's what this conference is all about. So let's go to it. Thank you.